Hey, TLP community. In today's episode, I'm discussing one of my favorite topics, both business-wise and legal-wise, which is growing your team. And specifically, this episode is for photographers and wedding industry professionals who are building out associate teams. I'm going to be chatting all about renting equipment, contracts, legalities, insurance, being an actual manager and leader, working with control and how to deal with team members. And with all of this, I wanted to bring an expert on to help me. Grace Troutman is coming on the podcast, you guys. Grace is a photographer, but also a business coach specifically to photographers who are building out associate teams. So let me give you a little intro about Grace. Grace Troutman is a Midwest-based wedding photographer and business educator. She's also the head of the Grace T photo team and has a team of 3 associates who shoot under her brand. She started shooting photography about 6 years ago and has traveled to places including Iceland, Ireland, Hawaii, Colorado, California, and Oregon to shoot sessions and weddings. She's lived in California when she first started her business, but Iowa is now called her home, and she was determined to live a life of travel while still being close to family and friends. That is one of the main reasons she built out an associate team in Iowa. She is also not only a photographer. I always like to tell you, the personal life behind our guests as well on this podcast. She is a wife and a mom to her 3-year-old daughter and is expecting her second edition in early July. So I cannot wait to dive into all things associate photography with Grace. Let's do this. You're listening to the Legal Paige podcast, where we chat about life and business with a legal twist. I'm Paige, attorney and photographer helping online businesses and creatives tackle their business dreams without breaking out in hives. No more legal mumbo jumbo. This podcast features simple, bite-sized advice that'll have you legally legit in no time. Are you ready? Let's get started. Friends, thanks again for listening to today's episode. Grace is here to chat with me all about associate photography, equipment, legal tips, communication with your team, and so much more. Grace, thanks for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm super excited to be on the podcast, so thanks.
Yeah, we've done a lot of things together behind the scenes and online and in your associate course. But I was like, Grace, you haven't been on the podcast yet. We have to tell the TLP community about your expertise in this area. So obviously, you know all things adding associate, teams to your company. I would, though, love for you to kind of give a little insight to everyone who's listening in, like who you are, where you started, and kind of now how you have this unique expertise based upon how you've grown your team.
Yeah, so I am based in Iowa. So I'm a Midwest wedding photographer. I do specialize in destination weddings, though. So I do get out and travel quite a bit. That's the perk of living in Iowa, is that it's cheap living here, so I can travel as much as I want to. But I do that, and then I'm also a business educator, and then also have a team of associates that I started back in 2018. So we've had the team for 4 years now, and it has been an awesome addition to my business. Not only to serve more couples and just give them a better experience, like the Grace Tea experience, but also just to make some extra income as well for me and to grow my business that way. So that's a little bit about me, but I went to school here in Iowa, and then my husband and I moved to California for a little bit. And we loved it there, but we missed home. We missed all of our friends and family. So after a couple of years, we ended up moving back to Iowa, and that's where my business really exploded. I just took off, was shooting 30 weddings a year. And at one point I was just like, okay, I need help. I cannot do this. Especially we wanted to start having kids. I was like, I cannot shoot 30 plus weddings a year. And that's where I had the idea of starting a team. So that's where the idea blossomed from, and it's only grown from there.
Yeah, there's one thing you didn't add in here that I always want to tell people about. You guys, Grace is the queen of reels.
Oh God.
She's so good at reels. And I know you have blown up on social media because you're just fantastic and creative, and it's so fun to watch. So you guys, first and foremost, as we get going here, I always like to tell people, Grace's voice, you're going to get to know her on these, podcast episode, but go to her Instagram. So her handle is Grace T, as in Tom, photography.
Yep.
And go just get a little bit of insight into who she is as we're going through this episode, because she's got quite the Instagram account and I'm obsessed with it. So
thank you.
And then I wanted to say, as we get started here, obviously we're going to be talking about this from a photography standpoint for everybody listening. So photographers, you're going to learn a whole lot. But I think a lot of what Grace and I are going to be bouncing off of each other is really applicable to lots of different small business owners who are building teams.
Yes.
Just because you're building an associate photography team, that is super niche, and there's a specific way to do that. But, if you're in the wedding and event industry, if you're a planner, if you're a videographer, if you're a florist, DJs build out massive teams as well. This applies to so many different types of wedding and event vendors that I think even if you're not a photographer, please continue to listen, because I really, truly believe you're going to learn a lot. And then from my standpoint, I run basically this whole digital online business, and I have a team as well and have built it out. So hopefully I'll be able to input a little bit and impart some wisdom in terms of a non-photography team and what that would look like. Okay. So there's my little 411 at the beginning. Let's dive into associate photography.
Yes.
So how do you just start to build that team out, right? I think that's everyone's first question is, where do you need to be in your mindset and in your business where then you're like, okay, I'm ready. I need to hire associate team members, but what do I do?
Yeah. So you need to take a look at a couple things. So obviously you want to make sure you have the demand. So, you don't want to hire a bunch of team members and then not be able to book with them and give them, jobs. So you want to make sure you have that demand. And it doesn't have to be a crazy high demand. It just has to be a demand to where you are not being able to step in and fill that role. So I've had, a couple mentees where they're like, well, I'm not shooting 40 weddings a year, but I still have dates that I'm already booked. Can I hire an associate for that? And I'm like, yeah, of course you can, but just make sure you're not struggling with bookings before you hire a teammate. Right. And then also, you just have to know that you are taking on a managerial role. So you're basically promoting yourself in your business. So just know that you are managing a team. You are the head of the team. You do have to make, some hard decisions sometimes. You do have to speak with all of the couples that hire you guys, and you have to be the point of contact. So just make sure that, if you are doing some sort of associate team where it is contracted workers, that you are, the manager of everybody. So just make sure you understand that. And it's not just okay, I'm going to have a team and I'm going to make some more income and this will be fun. So go into it with a plan. And then you want to make sure you're comfortable with taking on more in terms of couples and weddings. So for me, I was like, okay, so, I'm comfortable with kind of not shooting as much on my end and kind of transferring over the weddings that I didn't want to shoot over to the team. So instead of shooting 35 weddings a year, I would shoot 20 and then my team would shoot 15. And I've learned the past couple of years that, taking on more and more and more with the team, especially in 2021, that man, it is crazy once you start taking on a high volume amount with the team and also yourself. So you want to make sure that you can, have the capacity to take on all of that and manage all of that as well.
I would say the biggest thing that you hit on is people who are solopreneurs in especially the creative world. We're so used to being creatives, and that is where we get our drive and our passion from every single day, and that fills our cup up. And I feel like everyone's building out teams left and right, and you see people in the industry doing it, and you're like, oh, I need to do that. Or maybe you do have the booking, you're at the ceiling of your bookings. You need help taking on inquiries for the same day that you have already booked. 6-12 months in advance out. Yeah. But if you don't want to be a manager, I don't think building a team is for you. So I love that you said, like, kind of check yourself at the beginning and be like, do I want to manage people?
Right.
Because managing people and managing the back end of all of that work coming into your business is a lot. And I know we're going to get into it more here in terms of very specific things you need to be prepared for as the owner of the company and the manager of all of these people. But I would say step one that you just really hit home was, do you want to lead? Do you want to be a team? And do you want to take on, I would say, more back-end work behind your computer?
Yes.
It might not be editing, right? You might hire an editor out. We're going to get into that. Right. But you're still doing way more behind the scenes. And that is not for some people. Some people really thrive in being the photographer or being the planner at a wedding or actually doing the DJ work on the dance floor instead of all of the back end work and sending your team to go do the events. So I love that you said that. Now, in terms of getting your kind of ducks in a row, you know that I'm the legal Paige, so I'm going to talk about legal stuff, of course, with you. But what do you need to kind of figure out at the beginning? I think the first thing is, do you want to hire a contractor or an employee? And then how did you really do the step-by-step approach to, okay, what documents do I need to have? What do I need to talk to my CPA about? What do I need to look in the back end of, my expenses and my income coming in to be prepared to even start going and getting interviews for a team member?
Yeah. So literally all of that. but really, so when you are like, okay, yes, I want to do this, I want to go forward with it. Obviously make sure you have your ducks in a row in terms of legal things. So hiring a team is not just for fun. It's not, we'll touch on this, but it's not just passive income. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of back-end work that goes into it. And like I said, managerial work that comes with that too. So legally speaking, make sure that you have the appropriate contracts for one. And obviously, all about this Paige, but it depends on if you're hiring a contracted worker or if you are hiring them as an employee. There's a little bit of differences of that, but you want to make sure you have contracts for the people working under you, but not only that, have contracts for your couples who book you and make sure that they know that they are getting a team member. Communication is key with a team, not only for your teammates, but also the couples as well, to make sure that they're in the loop, that they know exactly what's happening, exactly what's going on. Because if a random person just shows up on their wedding day that they've never met before, it will be bad news bears for you. So, you just want to make sure that you have all of that stuff in a row and especially lay out your communication for one. Yeah, that would be my top tip.
Yeah. And to add on to that, you guys, I always tell people, how much control do you want to have of these people? That's a question you need to ask yourself when you're bringing on team members, because that's the biggest difference with independent contractors versus employees. We have other podcast episodes specifically on that legal difference between the two. But to give you guys a little bit of insight here, an independent contractor, literally the word independent is in there for a reason. They need to be independent of your business. So you're hiring them as kind of a subcontractor to your business. They need to have their own photography business or their own wedding planning business. Or, they just need to be able to say that they're either a sole proprietor or they have their own LLC. They are booking clients kind of separately from your business. They're just taking on additional work under your business. And you're kind of not controlling all of the rest of the things that they do. So you're not you have to work for me all the time. And you can't go do this session because it conflicts with, this in my business. That is tipping the line towards an employee. Yep. And so when you get to that point, wedding planners out there, DJs out there, if you're listening, and sometimes even florists out there, oftentimes you're probably looking at more of an employee model versus a contractor model, because a lot of the times the assistants you're hiring or the people who are going to be a lead DJ at a wedding or a lead florist at a wedding when you have 5 different weddings happening that weekend, those people probably don't have their own businesses and they are actually just working for you. And why some people just think, oh, I can just hire them as a contractor, but that's actually really not the case. They should be more employees. So I'm going to stop there. And if you guys have more questions about independent contractors versus employees, go listen to our other podcasts on it. And we have tons of resources at thelegalpage.com. But yeah, I think the first 2 things we've really hit on here, Grace, is, first, do you want to be a manager? Do you want to be a leader? Are you ready to hire on a team? Do you have the capacity to do that? Like you said, are you having, are you overloaded with bookings, and are you getting multiple inquiries for the same weekends time and time again? And then second, how much control do you want to have over these team members coming on? And you need to ask yourself that question to begin with. And then that will lead you down the path of a contractor as a worker or an employee as a worker. And then you get those specific legal documents in place. And then I love how you said you also can't just hire them and get your, have them sign an independent contractor agreement for your business. What about the flip side for your clients? So you guys remember, you have to communicate this to your clients as well. They're booking your business and you want to be very clear that they're not booking you. They're just booking your business and someone else may be there. And we're going to dive into the logistics here in a bit. So, all right. I think we can all agree as a whole that these past 2 years have just been wild, Grace, super wild.
And so wild.
And you started in 2018. So I can't wait to hear your perspective on this, because you've been doing it prior to the pandemic and you were kind of all set up. And I think now people are like, holy bejesus, this is the biggest wedding and event situation, because 2020 was whoop, halt, everything stopped. Last year was insanity. And this year, I think, I would love to hear your perspective. I feel like it's going to be more insane. Maybe you learned from last year and you're switching things up because you already have things, done on your end. But I think people are adding on teams this year because they are so busy. So do you wish this was something, do you wish this for photographers prior to 2021 and 2022? And what do you think, when is the right time for people to make this a reality? Do they do it right now at the beginning of 2022? Do they wait until next year? How do you suggest people play this out in their business world with kind of the busiest 2 to 3 wedding years we may ever see in our lifetime?
Right. Yes. Last year was literal insanity. We usually do about 40 weddings a year, and we did, I think, 56 total. So it was a lot. Yeah. And 40 is the top. So it was a lot. But honestly, I would say if you're thinking about hiring teammates and, building a brand of associates or photographers working under you or, whatever else in the industry, start doing it now. Only because it does take a little bit. You can't just hire someone on and be like, okay, let's start booking. You do have to touch on training with them. You do have to make sure that, you set expectations with your teammates of, what do you expect from them shooting? Like, what do you want in a wedding gallery? Are they going to be culling images? Are they, delivering to the client? Like, you have to set all of those expectations. And it does take time. So a lot of people who think they can just jump in like the fall season, no way. Like, I would never do that. Do it in your off season, do it now. So then at the end of the year, you have a legit team built out and you can actually start taking on bookings for the next year. Cause obviously, this year is booked up. Like everyone already booked this year. It literally, there are like no spots left available, especially for like venues, et cetera, other vendors. So most people are booking for 2023 right now. So this is when you want to be building your team. So you do have the teammates to provide in 2023, especially if, you're a photographer who wants to scale back a little bit and kind of divvy out, spread that load to other people. Or if you want to keep expanding your business and keep like hustling and growing and all of that, you can still take on a ton more work in the next year. So I would start right now.
Yeah, it's always take the first step, you guys. You have to take the first step. You have to get going on this. Now, with that, Grace, back to like managing and leading, you have to be prepared for turnover. And
yes,
I think people have this like nostalgic, like unicorn, everything is going to be rainbows, idealistic world of building out teams. And that is absolutely not the reality. I think you and I have both experienced that.
Yep.
What is your process that you've learned along the way to try and hire the right person for your team? I mean, we can give our biggest valiant effort here as the person that is the employer for the contractor or the employee coming on board. And sometimes it just doesn't work out. But what are your steps to try to make it work the best way possible and have longevity with your team members?
Yeah. So whenever I tell someone who is interested in starting a team, I tell them, okay, you are basically like, think of this as a restaurant. Like, you're going to have different servers that like come in for a year and leave. So think of it as like, they're college kids who just like want the summer job and then go. And that's okay. That is completely fine. Just know that it comes with the territory, especially if you're hiring contracted workers. They're not your employees. They don't have to stay with you for a certain amount of time. Just know that like when you are hiring someone, you want to find certain qualities, I guess, that reflect you. Because if you're building, teammates under your brand, people are expecting you in this person. So reflect a little bit about like, what do you bring to the table on a wedding day? Is your energy like really high energy? Is it like, are you a hype person the entire day? Are you loud and excitable? You want that associate to reflect that. If you're a little bit more quiet or reserved or focus on like quiet moments, romantic, you also want your associate to reflect that. So just make sure that they reflect you just a little bit. But yeah, I would say, that's probably the first step in taking to hiring someone who can represent you.
Yeah. The biggest, I keep being like, yes, I'm like nodding my head like crazy back here because we both hired teams. Get your mindset right as you go into it. And I love that you said you have to think of them as like a college student that's just trying to have a summer job or a server that's coming in and coming out a year later. If you want that like absolute longevity, you're looking at more of an employee model. Again, wink, wink, lawyer here telling you what to do. Because I think there's definite ways that you can create a team culture where they're like all in with employees and you want them to continue and you want to have them on board for 5 years. That is not the reality with, I would say, most people in the wedding industry. You're going to have people that want to come in, learn from you, and then go off on their own. And you have to be okay with that. I think it's beautiful to like see people grow, learn from you, be like, okay, this is how Grace does things. I'm representing her brand to the best way possible, but maybe next year I might try something different or go off on my own, or maybe I just don't like this as much as I thought I would, even though I'm putting my best foot forward while working as her associate. And you cannot be upset with people leaving. That's the biggest thing.
Oh my gosh, yes.
It gives people anxiety as managers and leaders. But if you have the mindset going in that I'm hiring contractors because that's the best business model for me, and I understand that there are ebbs and flows with contractors and they may want to leave at a certain time. Obviously, they can commit to things that they are putting on their calendar. That's absolutely necessary, right? You don't want them to commit to you and then leave. You're going to have all of that set in place with your contracts. But to be prepared for if they're trying to book, like you said, for 2023 next year, they're fully booked with you this year. You may come to a point where you have to have a conversation with them and they're like, I just don't know what I want to do next year. And you might be hiring on another associate to kind of fill that void that you have in your associate team. So I love that you said that. Now you've got, how many associates do you have, Grace?
I have 3 at the moment. The most I've ever had was 4, but 3 is like a sweet spot.
Yeah. And I think people, their first thought with, I'm going to get a team on board is like, I have to have 5 to 10. And I'm like, no.
No.
Start with 1. Start with 1 and like fill that person's calendar up as much as possible. And then think about, associate number 2. But as you start building, right, you've got 3 people now. Even when you're just hiring that first person, what is your best practice or tip for staying organized with your team members? You found the right people, but now it's time to onboard and then probably train a little bit, shoot some weddings, get them fully prepared to represent your brand really, really well when you're not there on some people's biggest day of their lives. I think people overlook this like onboarding step in the beginning and, they don't realize all of the things that they need, including a contract, but also just the onboarding process and the training process. How important is it? And what are your biggest tips here for people?
It's so important. So important because like I said, this person is representing your brand and your business. So they should know exactly how you like to shoot like flat lays and exactly how you pose the couples and what are the go-to poses on a wedding day. And, if they hit those go-to poses, then maybe they can, be artsy or have some fun doing something that they like and kind of throw their own twist on it. But as long as they make sure that they're getting exactly what I need for my business and my photos and what my clients are expecting, then that's fine. So training is so important. I actually do a team day with my team. We actually just set it up today. So we're doing that in a month where I have a styled shoot. Everybody comes. I kind of, again, be the manager and walk everyone through like, hey, this is what I expect. Let's go over posing again. And then we all just kind of hang out and we shoot a little bit, have fun, ask questions, and then we go out to eat and for a drink and sit down and kind of talk about, what we expect for the season moving forward. And we do that either once or twice a year, just kind of depending how the season is at the end of the year, but always at the beginning of the year, just to kind of refresh everyone. But also, again, like communication is key. So if you can't expect as a manager, you can't expect your team to read your mind. So you really have to be thorough. I've even given my associates, it's kind of like a little PDF guide, just in case they get stuck on a wedding day or something like that. Okay, let me flip through. I'm going to see how Grace does detail shots of rings. So things like that just to have on hand. I also give them my posing guide. I have a posing guide and I give that to them so they can have that in their back pocket, especially on shoots and wedding days. But just letting them be prepared as they can be and giving them the tools and resources to be prepared instead of just throwing them to the wolves and being like, okay, go for it. Let's see how we do type of thing. So yeah, just have them be prepared.
Yeah, mock-ups and trial runs is what you're
Yes.
telling people. And
Yeah.
I know so many people that don't do this in their business when they're hiring teams. Because how can you expect them to go to a wedding and adequately represent your business if they haven't been trained adequately by you?
Oh, yeah.
And so I love that you kind of have styled shoot days. You set everything up. They get basically a trial run, and then you can do constructive criticism on some of their photos once you look them over. They may have questions day of, and you're right there to answer them for, your team members as they're shooting, so that when they get to the actual event, they can remember what you said and, how to compose a shot or what to do with communicating and working and posing clients, so on and so forth. So I love that. That's a really good tip. Doing a whole day for people and doing it every year. It's kind of like a team retreat. It's like a team camaraderie thing. You're building that team morale, but you're also giving them like a play-by-play of, this is what I expect day of. Show me how you would do this. Okay, here's some feedback. I love your how you build that all out.
Yeah. And I also have them shoot with me too. I wanted to mention that. So I have them second shoot with me. So before we actually start having them take weddings, I'm like, okay, I want you to second shoot with me. So this is where I get to know like their personality on a wedding day and like how comfortable they are too, especially before the actual hiring process. Like if we second shoot and then I get their photos back and I'm like, this is not up to standards, then I'm not going to move forward with them being an associate. So, they do have to second shoot with me as well.
Okay, perfect. Good. All check boxes y'all need to do in terms of adding on associate photography teams. I love this. Now, I want to talk a little more about logistics because we do get this question all the time from the TLP community. So equipment, renting, loaning out equipment.
Yes.
Do you suggest that you have people use the exact same type of camera bodies, exact same type of equipment? Do you ever loan out equipment? And can you talk about like insurance, how that all works for your business? And then I can probably touch on, like how other people might do it too.
Yeah. So I never loan out equipment. It is my equipment and my contractors need to have their own equipment. That's liability things. Like if I loan it out and they break it, I just don't want to deal with that stuff. So for me, I never loan out equipment. They do have to have their own high quality equipment to shoot on. So we do all have the same brand of equipment. We all shoot on Canon. I always ask that I have Canon shooters just because we have an editor and the editor has let me know that, there is differences when it comes to Nikon and Canon. So we all want to make sure that it's the same consistent quality coming out. And then I do let them know I shoot on specific lenses. So if they have something similar to it or the exact same lens, that is great, just because I want those images to come out exactly how I would be shooting it. So, I usually shoot on a 35, but if they use, there's a new R series lens, the 2870. If they shoot on that, okay, great. Cause I know they can get to a 35, within that lens as well. So, so as long as they have around the same lenses and then definitely the same brand of equipment, that is what I expect from my associates.
Perfect. And then insurance wise, you guys, Grace touched on this. Obviously, liability and risk when you're loaning out equipment and memory cards, you guys. Please, that's a big one too. I think this is like a balance. I just want to let people know there's always a gray area, right? With the law. There always is. And I think memory cards are the gray area. The best way to do it, if you're hiring contractors like Grace does with her team, is they have all their equipment, which includes their camera body and their lenses and their flashes and all the things that they bring, tripods, yada, yada, but also memory cards, because those should technically be considered equipment that they should have as an independent contractor. I know that some photographers supply the memory cards to the independent contractors from their business. just so that for ease of like getting the memory cards back, they don't have to like transfer them back to the contractor and they can just take their own memory cards. I think that you're okay. However, I think you're skirting the line a little bit. And I never want you to be in a legal situation where, you know, the state government or the IRS is knocking on your door because they think you're actually hiring employees. And they're going to look at everything. They're going to look at things like that. Like, what is all the equipment, the contractors? Oh, you are giving them memory cards? Okay, maybe that looks a little bit more like an employee. You don't want to get in that situation, even though, right, it's all a balance. And if the balance is more heavily favored towards a contractor, then they're going to look like a contractor. And I think memory cards are one of those like very minimal things you need to be concerned about. But I always suggest that even memory cards should be on the contractor. You take their memory card and you put it on your hard drive and on your cloud and all of that stuff. But insurance-wise too, this is very important because you have your general liability insurance and probably property and equipment insurance as a rider on your insurance policy for your business, okay? We're talking about like a CGL policy, commercial general liability policy. It has exclusions in it. Like insurers and underwriters are very particular because they don't want to insure more than what you're actually wanting to get. And independent contractors are always excluded. So anytime you have a CGL policy for your business and you think it's going to cover your team, if you're hiring contractors, it never will. Which means if something happens to your memory cards that you're giving them, those won't be insured under your policy because technically they're employees but they're contractors now. And that's what Grace is talking about. Like, I don't want to deal with this liability and risk. So the easiest way to go about it is they have to have all their own equipment, including memory cards, and they need to have their own insurance and probably provide you with a copy of like the, you know, declaration page of that policy, just so that you know that they are indeed insured and you can see the policy effective date and then how long it goes through. And so they're going to be insured this wedding season because your insurance isn't going to cover them if they're contractors. It's different if they're employees and you have to notify your insurance company that you're having employees and they're going to look at the risk associated with that and then, you know, increase your policy premiums or what have you so that they're covered. But contractors aren't. And I just wanted to put that in there because it's so important for equipment. Like, you don't want a contractor coming back and being like, well, I was shooting a wedding for you and my $2,400 lens cracked. So pay me. Like that doesn't fly. And they need to have their own insurance for that. Any other tidbits, Grace, on that before we move on in terms of insurance and like equipment and loaning out property and things along those lines?
I do exactly what you said in terms of memory cards. So they shoot on their own cards and then I take the images off and then they get their cards back. So again, like think of like how much money you would have to spend on cards as a business. I mean, it's a write-off, but also just like that's a lot. That's a huge expense. So I would say, definitely have them use their own cards. You just take the images off of it, back it up, and give it back to them. So you don't have to have that liability.
Hey, listeners, are you ready to hire an associate team member? Well, the Legal Page has all the contracts you're ever going to need for your legal toolkit. We've got contractor agreements. If you're looking to hire employees, we have employee agreements. There is a huge legal difference there, so listen to this episode for more information. And if you need to add in contract addendums for rescheduling or adding on associate photographers, you need to add in clauses to your client contracts explaining what the roles and responsibilities are for both parties when they have an associate shooting their actual wedding. You got to get all these legal documents in place to help protect your business when you're growing your team. So I have an easy resource for you. Just head over to thelegalpage.com/associates with an S on the end. Again, that's thelegalpage.com/associates. And you'll find all of our contracts, free legal resources, including blogs and guides, and all of the contract clauses that you're going to need there as well. All right, let's get back into the episode. Okay, let's go over a couple situations for people now that we're, getting close to the end of this episode. I think people like real life situations to be prepared for. And I love talking about them on the TLP podcast because those are like, okay, you could get a sticky situation, but what does this actually look like in reality? So what, especially in the middle of COVIDity and this worldwide pandemic, this is the question, right? The ultimate question for hiring team members right now for weddings. What happens if someone gets sick or breaks a leg, right? Or has a family emergency or gets in a car crash and can't shoot the wedding after all? How do you handle that on your end? Because I think that's the most nerve-wracking thing for people hiring out associate teams and especially photographers, right? Because you're like the most important vendor at a wedding, in my opinion.
Right.
Like you can't, they want the photos because they can't get their day back. So, and you can't reschedule weddings. Unlike sessions where it's a little bit easier, you can't reschedule weddings. So I think this is probably another thing we probably should have talked about at the beginning. Like you need to know that you're a manager and a leader and you want to do that. How much control do you want to have over these people? And do you have steps in place for the what ifs? And are you prepared emotionally for the what ifs? Because they suck, like to be very frank, but they're a reality and you have to deal with them. And can you deal with those situations as a business owner effectively and efficiently, and you have a plan in place? So what do you guys do for those what if situations with associates?
I love that. You do have to be prepared emotionally because it's a lot. I'm sure a lot of business owners went through this, especially in 2020. I went through this in 2020. So I had an associate, I'll give you a real life example. I had an associate that told me that she got COVID maybe 5 days before, 3 to 5 days before the wedding that she was supposed to shoot for me. And I had actually seen her a few days before as well. So it was very nerve-wracking because I actually had a wedding too that I had to shoot. So thankfully, we got tested. She was positive. I was not. So I got to shoot my wedding. But I think, this is where a team does come in handy, which is really nice, is where, my teammate, she's like, okay, I have to step out, obviously. But another teammate was open. So she stepped in. And then in terms of the couple feeling at ease, they were like, oh, great. It's just another person on your team that knows what they're doing. Obviously, they had, set up a rapport with that specific teammate that couldn't be there, which was a bummer, obviously, that she couldn't be there. But they were like, it's fine. We know you've trained someone else and they have the skill level, and it turned out completely fine. But yes, you do have to understand that you are the manager and you have to take on all of that responsibility. I just had a friend on New Year's Eve who has a team, had a wedding where she has 2 associate weddings on New Year's Eve. Both of them got COVID on the week before. Oh, no. So she had to step in and shoot the wedding. And then she had to find another associate to come in and shoot for her. So you do have to take on that responsibility and understand and know that like, this is the territory that comes with having a team. It is amazing when it is amazing, but when it's not, it can, really suck. Lack of better terms, it can really suck. But so just know and understand, like you do have to take on that, but make sure that is in your contract as well. That, if something happens, like a teammate can step in or you can step in, but make sure that's outlined.
Yeah, always have that type of policy in your contract on the what if. So if you were to get sick or your associate were to get sick or, I feel like we're always dealing with COVID, so we're worried about sickness. Yes. But there's other situations too that are like, oh shit moments where someone has to fill that void for the wedding weekend. Another thing I was thinking about as you were talking is be careful, you guys, that you don't overbook. So you're not maxed out 100% on a wedding weekend. And this, I think, is probably the biggest mistake people make is they're like, my brand is overloaded. I'm getting multiple inquiries for X weekend. I'm going to hire on team members. And so then you have 2 extra associates and you're all booked up for one weekend. That looks good on paper, But the what ifs then make it so much more stressful for you when you don't have another person to go to. So
Right.
make sure you always have a cushion there and backups. So your first backups should probably be you. And if you're also booked, then you need to have an additional team member, an associate that isn't booked, that's just open on that weekend. And so be careful when you're strategizing and filling your calendar up that you are leaving like one person available every weekend. And if not, right, if that isn't a reality for you and you absolutely need to book everybody on that weekend because it's like, I don't know, the 2/2/22, I remember this year, it already happened. But like, there's been a couple dates that are like 8/8/18, I think was one a couple years ago. And everyone wants that wedding date. And so you're like, yeah, like I can absolutely book all 4 of us for that day. Like we're all going to have that filled on our calendars. But what happens if something occurs? Like you don't have anyone to fill it. So make sure that you have backups and make sure you have a backup for the backup. I always tell people have 2 backups in place. And Grace, I think this is probably important too, right? Like you keep, even though you have a team, you probably have a whole photography community around you that you continually can keep in your circle and foster relationships with them so that it's a give and take. If you can help them, you scratch their back, they'll scratch yours. I always say, even with a team, you guys don't think like they're going to always be able to save you or save the rest of your team in a situation. You also need to have a backup for those backups. I don't know if you do that in Iowa or you have that situation. Because what you explained is, I had another team member step in. But I just want people to know like that might not be a reality for you, right? Like you might not have another team member.
Absolutely. And that's important, networking and getting out there in your community as well and making relationships with other photographers. Like I said, my friend, who had that happen on New Year's Eve, she had other people that were like, yeah, absolutely. We'll step in. Not a problem. You can use a teammate of mine or like, yeah, they're available. Go ahead. And so it's, making those relationships and making sure that, yes, you don't overbook yourself. It was the 10/10/2020 for us.
2020. I love how we like know all these dates. You guys, it's really creepy in the wedding world. Like every Saturday date. And it like a year in advance. And then I just remember shooting all these weddings a few years ago. I don't shoot them anymore, but I like knew dates like the back of my hand, and my family and friends would be like, that's weird that what's happening next month on a Saturday. And I'm like, yeah. I digress there. Anyway, in terms of communicating with your clients about team members, we kind of talked about this a little bit, but let's get into the nitty-gritties for in your contract. How do you recommend, I think this is also just client communication and customer service. I'd love your take on this. How do you tell clients about your associates? How do you book your associates? How do you let them also know in your contract, like who's going to be there? And then if something were to happen, what your policy is for your business? I think people get upset. You've probably seen this in Facebook groups where clients will be like, no. I wanted you. I don't want a different photographer. And you're like, it's in my contract. That's like the best thing you can do for yourself is you signed off on this. But how do you communicate with clients effectively and efficiently throughout the whole booking process? And then from the date they book till their wedding day to be prepared for situations like that. So it's not just some stark happening that occurs when someone gets sick and then you're scrambling and your clients had no idea what your policy was to even begin with. Because I think that's really the issue. Am I right?
Yeah. I mean, again, communication is key. Like nothing should be a surprise for your clients. Nothing at all should ever be a surprise. So I usually go over this, especially with my couples who are booking an associate. I let them know immediately, before we even book together on the phone call, figuring out if we're a right fit for each other. I let them know, like, here is the policy. Like if someone cannot show up, I kind of read it through with them and let them know like, hey, this is what is in here and this is what will happen. But again, communication is key. So you should not, be surprising them with an associate on their wedding day. The amount of like photographers or videographers that I've worked with and the couple have been like, yeah, we booked this person, but somebody else showed up. I'm like, what?
Yeah.
How does that happen?
Yeah.
Like, how does that even happen? So, just make sure that your clients and couples are in the loop about who will be there because they want to foster a relationship with that person. And, if they think it's you that's showing up and it isn't, they're going to be super disappointed. And that leads to bad reviews down the line. And obviously you don't want that. So just make sure they know everything that's happening up front, even before they book with you and sign that contract.
Yeah, absolutely. That's like step one. And then I would even say like continue that communication throughout, like at least a couple times or at least once after booking.
Yes.
Because I think people are like, okay, I've communicated this, they've signed the contract, but people forget, right? They signed a contract with you a year ago. And I always just like to tell people like the communication doesn't stop from there. And the biggest way to avoid sticky legal situations or people being upset or bad reviews or they want a refund and now you're going back to clauses in your contract is to communicate that with them throughout the entirety of, your relationship. So from pre-booking to booking and signing the contract, then afterward, just making it really clear. I wouldn't do it right away, right? You just bombarded them with all the things they need to be aware of and what ifs. But give it some time and then just remind them also not right before the wedding. Don't do it like the month before where you're sending out and you're dealing with timelines and those type of things. Like they're already overwhelmed with the event coming up and they've got enough on their plate. Maybe remind them 6 months before. So it's like in between, like, hey, we just want to let you know, like we have all of this figured out. I also think it's very professional to do that. If you are managing a team, to be like, hey, we have a team in place. You have this associate. I just wanted to let you know because we're still in the middle of a pandemic. Like you can blame it on COVIDity. Like just basically saying, hey, I know this might be on your mind. I want you to know I've got it all taken care of. And here is what we would do. And this is our plan that we have in place. Like your clients are going to feel so taken care of. And also, you've put that seed in their mind that if something were to occur, God forbid, don't worry, we're going to handle it. And you don't need to worry about it week of, instead of them being like, oh my God, it actually happened. Now what? And we're 5 days out from the wedding. So I love all of that.
Absolutely.
In terms, there's so much more we can get into, but we don't have time for it. I want to know about editing because especially with photography, there's a lot of post-production, florists, DJs, all of that. Like you're kind of done once the wedding's done. Planning as well. I think I will say here before we talk about editing, planners, I oftentimes think you guys are hiring employees more than contractors, particularly because there's so much pre-work and then day of work and then kind of like the wrap-ups with all of the vendors and closing out, that event with your clients. So I do think that planners in particular have kind of like a little bit of post-event work like we do as photographers. But we have a lot more, I would say, than any other vendor there. I think we have the longest relationship with clients. I don't know if you agree, but they're going to book us right after the venue. But kind of the venue's done, right? As well. Once the event is over and people leave, like the venue's off the hook. You are like probably the second person booked. Hopefully, we would like it to be in the photography world.
Yes.
And I think it is becoming very more custom to have a photographer booked as an event or as a vendor second to your venue. But then you have the most elongated relationship with your clients because from the time of booking to the event to you are still talking with them 8 weeks, 12 weeks, 16 weeks after the wedding. And during that time is post-production. So can you just give everyone a little bit of insight if they are photographers and they're thinking about hiring a team? What do you need to be prepared for post-production wise and post-event? Editing, culling, managing, exporting, and getting galleries to clients. What does that look like as an owner of the company to kind of do the final checks on all of that? Do you have to do you have an editor? Like, are you then being the only one that's reviewing all the photos? Like, I feel like there's a lot that people don't know about, right? To keep a consistent look for all of your associate weddings.
So this is where I preach outsourcing for sure. But you have to know that you are the main checkpoint of where all of the images go through. So what happens after my associates get done shooting a wedding, they do not touch the images. They do not cull through them. They do not do anything else. They actually just hand the card over. I back it up. I go through everything and make sure everything's there. And then what I do is I do have an editor that edits everything. There's no way I could edit 50 plus weddings on my own. So I go through and I actually just pick out the sneak peeks. So I do all of those sneak peeks anywhere from, it just depends, 30 to 75 images, just depending on like how long the wedding was, if the wedding was super detailed, like all of that. But we do actually send sneak peeks to every single one of our couples anywhere from 3 to 5 days after the wedding. So we do that. And I actually send them out. So I go through and edit all of those and then send them out in an online gallery and then send everything over to our editor. And the associate is done. They do not have to do anything else at this point. They do not. And that's the beauty of it. And the draw of being an associate is, they get to show up and be creative and, do what they love to do. And that is photographing weddings and connecting with couples. And then they don't have to do all of that back end work. So if you are hiring a team, just make sure that you are doing a lot of that back end work. And if you don't want to do a lot of it, if you don't want to edit that many weddings, make sure you do hire an editor. I would not survive without my editor. She is incredible. So we go ahead, send it to the editor. She sends it back within 4 to 6 weeks. And then I upload the gallery and send it out to the couple. So I do all of that back end work.
I'm so glad I asked you this question because it really, you're hitting home here how much work it is to manage and how much work it is to lead. And it doesn't end by just booking couples with your associates for that date. You are doing way more of the back end work, way more of the post-production work, and you have to like that stuff. And there are this is the specific type of photographer business owner that should be hiring out team members is you are okay with everyone else being the creative person that they are.
Yes.
And you are going to lessen your creative, outlets. Honestly, you're going to lessen the time that you have to be creative because you're going to be working more on the back end. And with contractors in particular, like you hire, you're taking on all of that responsibility after the wedding. That's really important. One, it's ideal for photographers. They can just make a little extra money, hand over the memory cards, and they're like, "Okay, I'm done. Thanks." It's beautiful. What a photographer's dream. And then you're handling all of the back end stuff. And it's important to know, you guys, even if you have an editor, I outsourced when I shot as well. You still have to do the sneak peeks. You still have to send the editor, base images to work off of. And Grace is saying, I take on all that responsibility. So that's important to note as you're hiring on a team. And I think there's a huge draw to bringing on a team if you are willing to do that extra work for them after the event. They're like, hell yeah, hire me. Totally. I just want to make money to photograph. I don't want to do all this extra BS. So I love, love, love that you said that. My very last thing I wanted to touch on, and I do have a story after maybe you give a few little tips here because it literally just came up in an email this week. And I think these type of situations are good for people to be aware of. Do you have any other good tips for people that are hiring on teams that may do more traveling situations and how to be prepared for those where it's a lot easier to hire team members that are shooting in a very specific region where you all live. But once you kind of start adding on destinations and things along those lines, and I know that you do shoot a lot of destinations. I actually think you just put out a reel about being a destination photographer from Iowa, if I remember. I was like, I think I saw this morning. So like that brings in some complications and things you need to be prepared for.
Oh,
What
yes.
do you suggest for people that are like, okay, I need to hire a team, but there may be travel involved. How do you handle that
Right.
with your associates?
So this is something that I don't do. The reason I don't do it, I don't hire out destination weddings to my associates. The furthest that we will go is 6 hours, just because that's drivable personally. But then you have to start thinking about things like, okay, we have to pay for travel. Do they have car insurance? Things like, if they're buying flights, like who buys those flights? Do I buy the flights or does the associate buy the flights and then I reimburse them, type of thing? Do they have insurance on all their gear? They should anyways. But, in certain countries, you have to have like specific insurance or something like that. So, if they're going to Mexico or something like that. So, this is a situation where I don't send my associates there. That's why I do all of the destination weddings, because they're fun for me and I get to worry about myself and not other people. And especially you have to worry about if someone's hopping on a plane, what if they miss their plane? It's like, you don't want to have to deal with that stuff. So, personally, if you can keep your team local, I would honestly recommend that. But if you do have people flying for you, you need to take a look at your contract, especially with your associate on, what are they covering? What are you covering? Are all their meals like taken care of? Like, do you have to cover all of that stuff? Because then obviously your packages need to increase because you still need to profit. They still need to profit, especially if you're taking on all of those expenses as well.
Yes. Okay. It's totally doable, you guys.
Totally.
It's way easier to do it in a very specific region where everybody lives and they just drive and you have like a max drive distance. I love that, Grace. I love that. This is also a really great way for photographers to be like, I can have an associate team shoot all of my regional weddings, and then I get to do what I have always wanted to do, which is kind of expand into destination wedding photography. But I think for like adventure elopement photographers or people who solely run destination, photography businesses, if you're hiring on associates, you probably are hiring on them to travel and move around and work with clients in different states and fly and all of those type of things. So my last tidbit here, that this was literally an email from someone, is they hired them as an independent contractor and they had a destination wedding and all of the flight shit got mixed up. And it sucks, right? Because you think you just don't expect things to occur with a team member to this extent, but it is a reality. And it may not be covered in your contract. And the one thing I will tell people is it's okay. Like, it's okay if you miss things in your contract, because when what if scenarios happen, that's when you can go back and like amend your contract, change it up so that you're covering yourself for next time. I like to think of contracts as living documents. But this one person emailed us at the legal page and said, hey, we have your associate photography contract. We hired them as an independent contractor, but they are now no longer wanting to work with our company. But here's an issue. They booked the flight for a destination wedding on their own like flight account. I don't really know the back end story, but I'm guessing like the independent contractor associate wanted to either have the points or wanted to have access right to their flight bookings and all of those things. But then the company paid for it on their credit card. And I'm not really sure how this went down, because I'm like, wait a second, are you giving out your credit card to them? Like, what's happening here? Then the associate is done. Like, they don't want to work for this company anymore. And that happens, right? We've talked about that in this episode. Like, you have to be prepared for that. But now the associate is like, they are the ones that get the credit, or they can only get credit. I guess there wasn't a refund happening. And so the company didn't get refunded. The associate gets the credit on their account. And now the company, the photographer who hired them, is out money and doesn't get credit for it. So I was obviously this wasn't covered in their contract, and they had no idea that this could even happen, right? They've never experienced this before. So the one thing I will say, and this just happened this week, and I think Grace hit it home for us today, is if they are independent contractors and you are hiring them as such, they need to be paying for their own, their own flights. They need to be booking their own flights. And all of that needs to be a part of the package price. This is the easiest way to go about it, legally speaking. And they do not get reimbursed until their services are completed. So they are taking on a little bit of extra if they're an independent contractor. And this is a lot to ask for if you're hiring out a team as, a destination or elopement photographer. It's a lot to ask them to like pay for flights in advance and be prepared to pay for all of these meals and all of your lodging in advance. You will get reimbursed for them, and you will probably make money from that based upon our package price. But I would never reimburse them until services are performed and until the event is completed. So there's a little bit of like debt issues happening, right? If you hire out a contractor like that. But I always tell people like, this is what happens in like the building contractor world is any of your subcontractors that you have that are like working on a project in your remodel at your house, like there's a general contractor, right? And then there's all these subs. And like the tile sub is, going to do the tile in your bathrooms. Well, they're taking on debt and liability and risk of like getting everything done. And they don't get, and getting all of the materials in and all of those things. And then they don't get paid until the client pays the general contractor. And then the general contractor pays all the subs. That's exactly what's happening in the photography world. And you have to treat your business like that if you're hiring independent contractors. Like you can't just say, oh yeah, I'm going to reimburse you right away. Because then you're in this situation where, well, what if, right? If you're like, oh my God, that stresses me the crap out, Paige, then you need to be hiring them as employees because then you're dealing with paying for everything. You're just putting their names on flights. Like you're dealing with all of the bookings. You're going to be dealing with all of the credit and refunds on your card. And it wouldn't be on your worker to do that. So I'm gonna end there because there's a lot more I could talk about on that subject. But it was a reality for someone that hired, an associate photographer as a contractor for destination weddings. And it's something you guys got to keep in mind if you decide to go about your business that way.
Absolutely. Yeah, I was going to suggest too, like it sounds like that would be a better fit for an employee and not a contracted worker. But we do something similar, I guess, with if my associate does have to drive, 3 hours, 6 hours, whatever, they do invoice me after the wedding day for the hotel. So same kind of thing. That's a big scale with flying to another destination.
Yeah, I mean, you're totally right. Like it sucks a little bit for the associate to be like, okay, yeah, I probably need a business credit card now because I have to take on a little bit of those like prepayment things or pre-charges that will occur, but I will get reimbursed once I complete my services. And you will probably make a little bit more. That's also the beauty of kind of hiring independent contractors is they, your full package price that you may pay them or what have you. Maybe you have a base fee and you're like, you're going to get reimbursed $300 for travel for this wedding. And then they can book things for less and they could make more. And that's like awesome as a contractor that you have the power and you have the control to do that. And I think that's a good way to go about it in terms of managing the team and still making it like workable for a contractor that is traveling on behalf of your company. Grace, any other last little tidbits that you've experienced since 2018 that you want to impart wisdom on people hiring team members? I would love for you to kind of end the episode with that.
Yeah. Make it fun. Make it fun for everybody. Honestly, like it's incredible. And if you're at the point where you are wanting to expand your business and take on associates, first of all, congratulations. That's huge. That's a huge step in your business. So have fun with it and just be like happy and excited about the situation at hand because you have worked really hard to get to this point in your business. So, do those team days, make it really exciting for everyone and make it like an inviting atmosphere to work with you as well. So that's huge, is also being a manager, is having, a fun atmosphere and being able to have that open communication and creating a good relationship with your associates. So just have fun with it.
I'm glad you said that. We kind of just scare tactics here on this podcast where we're talking about legal things. And then I was like, oh God, yeah, I don't want to leave them on that note. Good job, Grace. Way to pull this back around. We're ending it on a light one. And I think Grace and I can both say too, like there's more things you have to take on when you're managing and leading and, working with a team. But the beauty of being a team, I think, goes above and beyond and is priceless compared to all of the things we just talked about that you have to be aware of and prepared for and emotionally, available for. I love having a team. The solopreneur world can be so lonely. And we've all been there. And if you're thinking about growing a team, it's a really awesome place to get to because you finally get to interact with humans again. And your company is now like a team culture, and everyone blends together to make the company what it is. And I love running a team, you guys. With all of the little things that occur, still my love for it and being a part of a team is absolutely insurmountable. It's so worth it. So I'm glad you said that, Grace, because you guys, we really do. Grace and I love running teams. We wouldn't have it any other way. Yeah, that's why we have them. Like I would never go backwards. So, anyway, Grace, where can people find you? And then let people know about your associate photography course, because you tell people a lot more than we just talked about in this episode in that course.
Yes, you can find me on Instagram at Grace T Photography. My website is gracetphotography.com. Same thing, Facebook, any other social media channel, TikTok, Grace T. And yes, I do have an associate course. So I built this course, and actually Paige is in the course, which is great. And we talk a lot about the legalities of having an associate team in the course. But it's a jam-packed course full of info about starting a team. So if you're thinking about it, and you're like, okay, I don't really know where to start, but I want to have a team, that's a great resource for you.
Yeah. And you guys, there's a lot of courses out there on building teams, but this is the best one that I know of for building a photography team. And I truly mean it, Grace, because you have people that have built really cool teams after learning from you in your course. And there's a way to go about like educating on building teams. And I think Grace has the finesse and honestly the experience to be able to teach that to others. So I cannot highly recommend this course enough. And then, I talked a little bit about independent contractors and employees throughout this episode, and we dive deep in that module in the course too. So if you guys want more very specifics to photographers and hiring on them, we go way in depth in the course in that. So anyway, all of this will be listed in the show notes, you guys. I'm going to give you access to all of this. Grace, thank you so much for being here. And everyone, thanks for tuning into this episode.
Thank you so much. This was so much fun.
Thanks so much for listening to this episode of the Legal Paige podcast. See, I told you being legally legit isn't so scary. Be sure to visit thelegalpage.com for all show notes. And it would be super awesome if you could head over to iTunes and leave a review. Last but not least, don't forget to join my free Facebook group for unlimited legal and biz Q&A. Chat soon, Legal Pagers.